that conflict is part of everyday life. It's something we deal with. It's actually a very positive thing. Whenever I did training, people would always, you'd fill the flip chart, but it would all be negative. You'd find it hard to find a positive word about conflict, but actually it is positive because we're all dealing with it all every day in some shape or form where somebody disagrees with what you're saying. So it's always about having the conversation.
Welcome to the Masters in Coaching webinar for July. And as you know, our theme for July was creativity. And we have ran quite a few topics centered around creativity. The topic today is quite a thought-provoking, creative topic. And it's not often that we speak about career development within the Masters in Coaching program, or career enhancement, career growth. And what I have noticed in speaking to other coaches, listening to coaches coaching their clients, that this topic was repeatedly coming up as in clients preparing for new jobs, preparing for interviews, and having some concerns around that, or thinking about how they could better themselves, what more they would need. And of course, this topic also was raised by many coaches as an area of growth, meaning how do they get new work? How are they closing deals? And how are they preparing for interview type questioning? And it's not in particular about all the academia stuffs, but it's all about the other part, how do you show up with your presence and so much more. I'm very grateful that Eilish could join us today as an expert in this topic, career coaching. And Eilish has been doing this for quite some time, has designed programs around it, has put in place structures for candidates going for interviews. And she's just awesome on this topic. And I'd love to, or I'll now introduce you to Eilish. And Eilish is going to do a short presentation. And thereafter, we'll engage in some discussions. And may I invite you to put up your questions into the chat box. Eilish, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. And like you said, career coaching is something that I love doing. And I wanted to say to our audience, our participants today, that, whether you're going to apply or you want to change job, and sometimes it's very common, I noticed in coaching over the years, is people wanting to move out of whatever career they were in and maybe start their own coaching business, or whether it is that you're on an interview board to interview for coaching, or you're coaching someone. This can apply. You can twist this whatever way. I have used it, like you said, for a number of years. I mean, going back a long time. And I can say, hand on heart, that I've had 98, if not 99% success with candidates using this. And the biggest thing I say to you, if you're going for an interview, is to believe in yourself. That's where I start off always. And it's always about minimizing any fears that might come up. We have the amygdala and the brain, like the reptilian brain. I was trying to think of the word. And, that can bring up fears in us. And we all have it, and it's happening all the time as we speak. And I always tell, that's one of the first starting points for me with someone, is start from today and believe that you're going to get this job, that has your name on it, and don't entertain any thoughts of fear. And particularly in the interview, be aware that when you minimize the fear and calm the amygdala, you have the whole of your brain at your disposal to answer any questions. So that's a big starting point. So I'll go through the presentation. I have different presentations, but this is one I picked, and it goes through the methodology used in competency-based interview. This is specifically looking at competency-based interviews. And I will say that I have used this with someone who applied for a career in Amazon, and they have like 14 markers for their, I think it's around 14 of what they want in their applicants, but also there's a whole list of things you can research. So if you're applying for a job, do your research for the company or wherever it is you're going to apply. And this methodology worked for that person. They got the job. They had 3 different parts to their interview. One of them was the technical side, and they went down slightly on the technical. But one of the good things about Amazon is they said, look, we want you for the job. We're going to put you in that part where you meet the technical, and they've upgraded them since to the technical. They've educated them. So it seemed to be a good career. But this methodology was what I used with him. I'm just telling you, it works. So anyway, here goes. I'm Eilish Keown. I'm trained and certified in conversation intelligence. I'm an MCC coach with International Coach Federation. I'm also trained in conflict coaching quite a long time, and many other things which we haven't time to go into. So I was told this years ago, an interview is a conversation with a purpose. So you enter the interview, and within the interviews I'm familiar with, 3 people will be on the board, and there'll be a chair and 2 other people, and they will have specific roles in the interview, and you will be told that at interview. But if you realize that they are just people like you and I, and that they all have the same brain and the same approach, I try to tell people to use pictures and storytelling. Whatever you're talking about that you've done, use storytelling, because it's very attractive to people. I've sat on interview boards, I've chaired them. It's very attractive. So that's just a general kind of introduction to what I'm going to tell you. So for yourself, try and identify what makes this a good learning conversation for you today. And if you're going for an interview, how can you support yourself in the process? Because you will need supports. And I think it is a good thing to have career coaching before an interview, because let's look at it. You have the edge on people who don't do it. That's what I always tell candidates. People go in and they haven't even thought that they need to do this. And so they haven't rehearsed anything or prepared. So preparation is the key. And as I said, what you're afraid of and how you deal with it. You need to have that sorted early on in your preparation. So there's before I go on to that, there's 3 main points that I would say in applying for any job. It's the job description. So what is the company or the business telling you they want in a candidate? That is the description. They will give you a job description, and that's really important for you to pay attention to. They generally give you a person specification. So that means that this is the job we have on offer, and here's the person we think will match that job. So for all of you listening, your piece of work is the next piece, because that's your CV or your curriculum vitae. So you're going to match your curriculum vitae to what they say the person for the job must have and the job description. So that's one of the key things I teach. And I always ask for, can I have your job description? Can I have your person specification? And I will comb that then for key words and points that you will highlight in your CV to make it attractive to them when you go to interview. So, okay, so competency-based interviewing I'm trained in. As I said, I've interviewed in, and I'm fairly au fait with it. So whatever company you go to, they'll tell you what competency, they mightn't call it, they usually do though, but they will tell you, here's the person we need for the job. So we're looking for somebody who can problem solve. It's always and ever in a job description, problem solving and decision making, because we need somebody who can think on their feet, who, you know. So, and generally speaking, there'll be a section on how do you manage the resources we have, you know, management of finance, experience of managing and updating. These are just samples. Enterprise resource planning systems, or planning and managing resources, including commitment to quality service, or always and ever, relationship, managing relationships. And now team working is becoming the buzz and the norm, but managing relationships, I've interviewed umpteen people in that, and I would tell you that this is the place where they kind of do the least work in their preparation, and yet that's the piece that you need to be doing most work, is in your description of how you get along with people and how you deal with conflict in the workplace and all of that. So when we're doing competencies, on any interview boards I've been on, communication, we're looking at from you apply for the job, how did you write up your application? How are you in the interview? So we don't ask questions on that, we just judge it in your overall approach, okay? So any questions? I think, Cindy, will we do that at the end, or what do you think?
I think we'll do that when you have done, Eilish, then we'll
Yeah.
start taking questions and discuss.
Yeah. So here's an example of managing relationships. And for every competency, I want you, if you're preparing for a job, to do this. You really have to do this. Find an example on your CV that indicates where you manage relationships. And this is how you do it. You drill down roughly 5 points. So what happened in the organization? It may be that somebody was shouting at you, somebody was misbehaving, a member of the team was disruptive. What was the situation you were involved in? What was your role in it? How were you involved? Who else did you involve in it? And what were the obstacles? And how did you resolve it? And a key thing is, what did you learn from that process? So this is generally outlined in competency-based interviews as a way to look at questions, but this is what you do. So you're getting your job description, your person spec, and your CV, and with your CV, you're matching what they're asking for in the job description and person spec. I know this is kind of complicated. I said to Cindy, you'd need 4 3-hour sessions on this, to be honest with you, to get the detail and to understand it. But anyway, so when you're talking about your work experience, explain the background. What objectives were you trying to achieve? What did you do? What action did you take? What was the outcome? So that's kind of repeating the previous one. What did you learn from the experience to bring it forward in your job? So you may say, well, I took that person aside. I said, and I need to talk to you privately. And you say, what was going on there? I just observed you with a customer and it didn't look good. And how did you deal with that? And what do you think? Is there something going on personally for you? And, you tell that story to the interview board, and you might say, we discussed it and we decided between us that it wouldn't happen again and all of that. So what was the outcome? And the person agreed they wouldn't behave like that in the future. So it's that type of example. So this is more of it. The questioning, how did you involve in what you did? How did you do it? How did you manage the relationship? Who presented problems for you? And problems are a big part of interviewing. You will be asked about problems. How did you manage it? Give examples of meetings you called, conversations, how you managed staff who disagreed, and how you got agreement. So I had done up the slide, Cindy, because I wasn't sure what our audience was. And this slide and the next one is about what the interview board are looking for. So this is giving you information on why they're doing what they're doing. So I always think of it, and we were trained in it, that it's like a cone, an ice cream cone. Think of it like an ice cream cone. It's very wide at the top, but it funnels right down into a very narrow place. So if you're in an interview and I'm questioning you, and trust me, you find it hard to get by me if you're not telling me the truth. So you start to describe a whole situation, and the funnel effect is drilling down on what you're telling me. So how did you do that? What did you do? So the purpose of the probing questions is to find the context. Who did what? Because you may be telling me something and you may never have done it. To be honest with you, I interviewed some people and they all worked in the same place, but there was, I mean, it was big interviews, but these three people worked in the same unit. They all had the same example and they all said they all did the same thing. So that kind of is very easy to flush out when you're when you are the interviewer. So then you talk about your responsibility. So you're trying to find out from the candidate, what was your responsibility in that? What contribution did you make? Because it's all about you. It's not, and don't be afraid to say I did, I. And in competency-based interviewing, you're trained to talk about I. This is what I did. And in some instances, you're asked, well, what percentage of that was you? You know, judgments and thinking, any problems or obstacles. So you're trying to find all of this out from the candidate. So this is more of it. So I suppose this one should be before the other one, sorry. Open the conversation. So you open the conversation and you probe the candidate. You probe further. So you're going down that funnel to see how they demonstrate the required skill set. Check on the outcome of what they describe. What was the learning for them and how can they use what they learned? Now, what I will say, you know, when I was training people, I would take them through this whole process and I would probe them. And if you are doing that for someone, even if it's somebody belonging to your family who are going for interview, make sure you do this because that prepares you really, really well for the interview because you're being asked questions that are finding out what you know and what you don't know. And they will, trust me, they will get to that. So I understood, Cindy, when I was doing this, that we were in a group that could do breakout rooms. So I thought we would be doing practice for 20 minutes because I have done this with groups and they found this to be most beneficial. That, you know, one person is, you can practice this at home actually, you know, one person is the interviewer, one person is the candidate, and somebody observes. And so you experience what it's like to be the interviewer, what it's like to be the candidate. And then when I have people here in my office where I'm doing this, if they're not understanding, I just get up off the chair and I move them around to my seat and I go to their seat and I say, now you asked me what I just asked you. And it's like role play, and it really is very effective in helping people understand that it's not this big fear thing that you think. We're all just very human and we're all, you know, it gets you to understand what it's like for an interviewer, because there's always stuff going on for interviewers as well. So these are kind of sample questions that we would use. So tell me about the example you put forward. What did you have to consider? How much time did you have? So if you think back to your looking at your job description and person spec, and I would say they are the key to the entire interview. And I would get a highlighter and go through it for the keywords it's mentioning. And on your CV, highlight that experience. And then when you put it into this sample question, your example is to mirror all of that. So your example would have the keywords in it, you know, and I suppose having the candidate understand that. But I would be, and you would be possibly working with someone through that. So you'd be, these are the kind of questions you'd be using. What, because when they've done the 5 key points, and then I usually say, pick 3 more from that. So say I'm saying I managed budgets and payroll in an organization. So that's what I did. But how did I do that? So I bring forward maybe 3 more examples of budget management that I had to, you know, get the financial statements in place. I had to organize staffing levels. I had to whatever, 3 of those, so that you have an examples put forward, because the key to competency-based interviews, it's all about examples. It's all about your examples. And you will oftentimes be asked when you're submitting an application for a role, you will be asked to give competencies. And having the competency completely concise, completely inclusive of what is in that job description and person spec, because they are really the key words, and they are what the company is telling you they want. So they're actually telling you, here's what we want, and you're going to say, I actually, you can't pass me because I have that. I actually know that, you know. So, and then I suppose this was prepared for the role play, you know, the context, the probing. And when you would role play that, you'd start to understand the probing. And, you know, as I say, if I said I did, it could be, it could be planning and managing resources. So I have to, it could be a sales job. I have to prepare stats for the next month. So how did I do that? And what did I do? And what problems did I come up against? And then you say, so how did you respond? And what options did you consider? And what was the difficulty in that? And how did you make the right decision? And how do you know you made the right decision? These are key questions that are always asked, you know. How did it affect other people? And this is really where the relationship management comes in. What did you do? What did you say? What did you do next? And very quickly, you will pick up the attitudes of somebody in an interview, and you'll also pick up how they manage relationships. And you will be asked a direct question like, how do you deal with conflict? And what I always say about conflict management is conflict is part of everyday life. And I always look at it this way. If we're talking to one another, we're here. But as conflict, and if you experience conflict, it's going this way. So in order to resolve conflict, what must we do? We must come together. So I always teach candidates the answer. There's a fly hovering around me. I always teach candidates the answer to this question, you know, that conflict is part of everyday life. It's something we deal with. It's actually a very positive thing. Whenever I did training, people would always give, you know, you'd fill the flip chart, but it would all be negative. You'd find it hard to find a positive word about conflict, but actually it is positive because we're all dealing with it all every day in some shape or form where somebody disagrees with what you're saying. So it's always about having the conversation, always and ever. So if you're asked that in an interview, I took them to one side, I had a conversation. I asked, what's going on? Can you tell me? Anything happening at home, anything personal, as I said earlier. So how did it work out for you and what was the end result? These are asked over and over in interviews. It doesn't matter whether you're going for a top job, these are the questions. And how was it satisfactory? How did other people react to the outcome? What did you learn from the approach you took? Because very often, you know, people won't be happy with an outcome, and you just say, well, we agreed to disagree. We sat down, we talked about it, and we understood that. I suppose it's something in conversational intelligence around exploring together what are the difficulties and sharing and coming to a conclusion on what we both agreed that we can both agree on. And so you can give examples of that. What did you learn from the approach you took? And in what other situation have you been able to apply it? So I suppose if I thought we had the role play, Cindy, I was doing this, what was it like the discussion would be? And we can still open up that question. What do you think it's like being the interviewer? Because I've been the interviewer. And you know what it's like being the interviewer? You have a set of questions, and very often in competency-based interviews, they are the same questions for every candidate because you have to be fair to people. And in my experience, when you leave the room, we are all agreed on what the marking is and it doesn't change. We do it as soon as you leave the room. And so what's it like being the candidate coming into the room? So if you prepare well, as I have described, you're going into that room armed with information that you may not have done if you had not done the preparation. You would be going in thinking, yeah, sure, I'm working, say I'm working as a receptionist in a doctor's office. I do that every day of the week. Sure, it's no, I'll go and I'll do that. Whereas if you prepare for the questions that are going to be asked, like I said, you have the edge. Like I'd have people in well, all forms of healthcare, dietitians, pharmacists, whatever, and they all got the job, but they all followed this process. So what was it like if you were observing it? It's really, this is really about educating you on how to do a good interview. And you can read all the books you like, but the fundamental thing is, what did they say was the job? Who did they say they want for the job? And I must match that. That's the simple formula. So, Cindy, I think that's what I have in this presentation today, as I say. So I'm not sure what you want to do next. I think that's the end of that presentation. Like there's lots of things you can do, you know, but
sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Eilish, thank you. That was very detailed, and yeah, I love those questions. A lot of it is still sitting with me, and many of them are very coaching-like. Yeah.
yes, yes.
I also like what you said about the relationship management, because somehow when there's a tendency to give focus on the academia of the interview, or the what I have in terms of, there's a match, like you kind of match your education stuff into the what they're looking for. But there's so much more, right? Like you were talking quite a bit about the relationship management.
Yeah, because everything we do, if you think about it in the workplace, is about relationship, isn't it? So
Yeah.
if you need data, if you need figures, as I said, like the sales office is going to the production line, what do we need? The materials, the procurement end of things, like have we the right stock in place for what we need? Everyone has to talk to everyone, and there's all these different departments, and everything is about relationship, isn't it? But in all of the jobs that I have dealt with for people, including the Amazon jobs and other jobs, would include a section on relationships in the competency. And that chap that I had here not so long ago, he had 3 separate 1-hour interviews. So he had somebody, expert in one aspect of the interview. They are tough interviews to get through. The second one, he had to do with HR, and they would cross-question you on everything you've said about HR. The third one, as I said, was technological, or, it was something to do with wiring, and like he was technical, and he had to spend an hour answering questions and that. So when you go for an interview, you must know your stuff. That's one of the big things. You must know your stuff. So if I have people coming in here, which I have people for different things, as I said, and there's one of the case studies that I have written was for WBEX, and they used it in their sales actually on conversation intelligence, was my case study. And it was a nurse who came to me for coaching. Is it okay to tell that story, Cindy?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
She came to me, and she won't mind because she's agreed to all of this. Her name was Laura, and she had been for interview, and there were 300 candidates, and she didn't get the interview. And it was a yearly thing, and it was to study, and you probably have it in India and other countries, public health, nursing, not in a hospital setting, in a community setting, but you had to go to college to train. And so to get accepted into college, you had to do this interview. So I went through this process that I have here with her. And I taught her about the fear, and I taught her about, she was very, very smart, you know. I taught her about using stories and pictures. I said, they have brains like you have brains, and you're going to talk to them in stories and not feel threatened. And I suppose a key thing for Laura, which possibly I haven't said in the case study, was that she was going for a job in the public health system, right, for this training. She worked in the private sector and she needed to know a lot about the public sector, but she hadn't realized that. So I spent 3 hours with her here at my kitchen table at the time. I didn't have the office. And I went through everything with her. And I sent her packing and I said, now there's the job description, there's the person spec. And I didn't give her the questions. I just told her to match her CV with what they said they wanted. And I said, and from tonight on, I want you to picture yourself a public health nurse. I forgot I said this, but she actually gave me that in the feedback, you know. And she came back to me here and I spent 3 hours interviewing her. I interviewed her, I interviewed her, and I interviewed her again. And she came number 24 out of 300. And she got a job locally, which she had to drive an hour or more to the city and back each day as it was. So she sent me a picture the following year holding up her new baby boy in her gown where she graduated. So that was a really good news story. But really and truly, this might sound simple, but this is how it works. It works. I'm telling you, it works. And if you can't have or afford or whatever it is to pay for interview training, you can have your family do that for you. You know, you can find a way, but you must practice before you walk into the room. Because if you walk into the room with no practice, you're going to be too nervous. What happened to her too in the earlier interview, she told me, they asked her a question, and I know this from my training that this is a fact, that it takes 4 minutes to recover from something that throws you off guard in the interview. So she was asked a question and she gave the answer, and they're looking at her and they're saying, anything else? And she's saying, I gave them the right answer. And they're saying, anything else? Is there some other thing now? And so I knew what the answer was she should have given them, you know, but I told her what that was. But that made her nervous and she went downhill from then on. So it's about preparation, and it's about, if you don't know something, just say, I'm really not understanding what it is I'm meant to know. And I'd love you to tell me what it is I'm missing. And what it was she worked in the private sector, and they were, the surgeons went on holidays and they hadn't said something like that, and they had to cancel the clinic or the admission. So it was theatre, she worked in theatre. And so she said she brought the patients in the night before for a new date. And I said to her, I know what it is straight away, because in the public sector, that would be seen as a waste of a resource and costing money. You would bring them in on the morning. So I told her, if this comes up in the next interview, you say, I brought them in the morning for their day surgery, you know. So that was really clearly what was needed. But I'm just saying it was about identifying how do you get, when you get stuck in an interview, it is okay. The interview board are people. You just say, I don't understand. And you can't keep saying, I don't understand 10 times, you know. But generally, if you're stuck, it's much healthier to say, because that stops you getting that 4 minutes. And it also said, it can take the interview board 4 minutes to recover if something happens with a person on the panel, you know. So that's another thing to think about. So anyway, that's relationships. It's a big part of interviewing. It's a big part of coaching. It's a big part of everything, isn't it?
Absolutely. So Eilish, you were saying that, okay, so one of the things that, well, most clients, most coaches, when talking about interviewing, going for jobs and business, they would say what makes them really nervous is the lack of, as you said, preparation. Yeah, we spoke quite a bit about preparation, how to prepare adequately. Anything else that you notice makes people nervous for interviews?
Well, that's one of the things, Cindy, is getting the questions wrong. Or that's a very good question, Cindy, because the simple answer to that is preparation. Because what
Yeah.
makes you really nervous is not having prepared. And if you know, and I know I'm laboring the point, but if they have told you this is a job, and they're telling you, you must explore every avenue of that for yourself and about what you know. And like in interviews that I have either interviewed for or been part of, there's always a professional knowledge section, or like you said, expertise, like that chap is technology. It could be, whatever. And that part you must know, and that can be marked. Everything's marked, but that can be marked on your abilities and your skill set. But you can pick up marks on the wider things of the managing relationships, the team working, the managing resources, all of that. But professional knowledge is kind of a given, and it's generally speaking, to get an interview, you have to tick that box of professional knowledge. You must tick the box of eligibility for the interview. But once you're in the door, then it's up to you to do the work to get ready for that interview. And it is all about, and always about maybe having some coaching on it. Maybe, I think, honestly, like I've had people here and they just like that girl, but lots of people in her field came to me and they've all got the job. Every one of them have got the jobs that came to me because they're prepared adequately for it. And maybe if you think of it, if you have 300 people coming in for interview and 10 of them have really prepared, well, who's going to get the jobs?
Yeah.
If you've
And I love what you
scrutinized your
said.
CV.
Sorry, I love what you said about the I. Use the word I instead of we, because there's a tendency to use we more than I. And then when you use we, of course, the flip side of it is, did you do it or did the team do it, right?
That's
And of course, I
exactly it.
think, yeah, you want to show that you can do it too.
Yeah, and what you have to show is what I did in the situation. And even if it
Yeah.
was a team, I did something in the team. Like sometimes it would be like, say I had counselors, or, there'd be a case conference about something. And so what was your role in the case conference? And you need to write it out. You need to write it out what your role was. But then when you've written it out, you have to condense it. I've often had people, like I had one girl came to me and she was applying to be social worker. And as soon as I saw her application, it was already gone in. Or was it? I can't remember. And she answered one of the competencies by telling them everything educationally on social work. And I said to her, who do you think will be on the interview panel? Social workers. They might be very qualified social workers, extremely senior directors or whatever. And I said, so you don't need to tell them the academia of social work, but you do need to tell them about you. So these are kind of minor little errors people make that they're not aware of, because they want to they think they're answering the question, but the answer was, tell me about you in that competency, not about social work academia. Another example I can give you, and it's a health one. I think this girl was a dietitian, and actually she did very well. She didn't get the first job because the person who got it was more senior in her qualifications. But when she sent me the job spec and the person spec, and then she sent me her application, she had worked a lot with people with Alzheimer's and all that type of thing. And that was a requirement in this particular hospital, in this job. And she hadn't mentioned it in her examples. She'd missed it. But, when you're going along with the highlight, that's a key word. Demonstrate experience working with elderly with Alzheimer's. You know what I mean? And you would say, oh, sure, that's so obvious. But that's what a coach or somebody training you in interviews will spot straight away, you know. So
Hmm.
maybe to be able to spot that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right? I mean, I would look at it like that. Like, why you're asking me this question? Of course, it's assumed that I know this. And I'd leave that part out, making the assumption that
Exactly.
the other person would know. Yeah.
Exactly. And I did have I was on an interview board many years ago with a girl that I knew well, and she had a candidate in, and the candidate worked in budget management and finance. And when we came out for a break, she said to me, I didn't ask her any questions on finance and budget because I know she works in that area. And I said, and how are you going to score her? She has to be marked on finance and budgeting. You can't not ask her questions in that. And she said, oh, I never thought of that. She had to go back in and then do the that part of it, you know. So interview boards can make mistakes too, you know. But
Absolutely.
I think what you said is right, Cindy. You know it's so obvious and you might play it down when it's the key thing they're looking for. That's why I'm saying you must pick out key areas they want. And they will tell you, they will always tell you what they want in the role.
There's a question here on the chat box, and coaches, if you participants, if you have questions, please type it in or share your insights. Share what's going on with you as you're listening to this webinar. We'd love to know. Eilish, the question is it possible to share an example of a mid-career crisis and how coaching can help? Mid-career crisis and how coaching can help.
I wonder what type of crisis is that? A mid-career crisis. Is that like, you know, I would be assuming something that might be incorrect. Is there any key words in that mid-career crisis?
Yeah, Rajiv, I think you know that Eilish can, unpack things quite well. Please, can you explain that a bit more so that we can answer it for you? Eilish, I have another question that shows up quite a bit. All these examples and scenario that we ask candidates seem to have a past indicator. Yeah, like what have they done in the past? So I want to know this question. How much of an interview focuses on what the candidate can bring in for a more future focus?
Yeah, and that's another good question, Cindy, because in the past, before competency-based interviewing, people came into the interview and learned everything off and just rattled it off. And there was no evidence that they understood what they were talking about. And competency-based interviewing is evidence-based. So you have to prove to the board. So they say, here's what we need, like I said, and I'm telling you by what I know on the examples. And if I'm the interviewer and I'm drilling down and funneling, then I am also finding out, is that really true? So I'm understanding that you do know what you're talking about. So you actually would be a good person for the job instead of picking somebody who rattles something off by heart. Other questions we would say was, why would we give you the job? I would also ask that question. Why do you think you should get this job? You know, and you know what people often say, which I don't think is a great answer. Well, somebody told me a long time ago it's not. I'm a hard worker. Well, 20 people are hard workers. Why would I give you the job? You know, so it's back to the example when I was set targets in my previous job and I was given 2 hours to prepare something, you know, I was able to, and I did this, and this. Another thing that I would say, there's different forms of interviews, Cindy. There's the group interview. I know people, and it's a long time ago, had to do a group interview where they were weeded out, you know, with asked to do role plays, and they would watch who's taking the lead in this. You know, there's different styles. That's why I said at the outset, this is the interview style that I'm talking about today, the competency based. There's also, I know somebody I did train, he didn't get the job. He has a better job now, but I did train him in the methodology, and you can bring that methodology with you all the way. But he, in the interview, was asked, you have 20 minutes to make a 10-minute presentation. So you go away for 20 minutes, here's the topic, come back in and present to us. So, some corporations will do that, and he didn't get the job. But in all honesty, in the area that he was applying, some areas the jobs are already taken, so, and I'm not saying that happens a lot, but if somebody's in a job maybe temporarily and the job's advertised, that maybe that person has an edge on other people, But that's Cindy, that thing of the experience is what arms you going into the interview for the job and the demonstration. So I'm going to pick up, trust me now, Cindy, I can weed out a worker a mile off, because I'm going to find out from you, do you really do what you say you do? And I'm also going to see your qualities. I'm going to see your communication, how you behave in the interview, how you articulate the answers, what you're telling me you did. So you're telling me your life story, really. As I said at the beginning, it's a conversation with a purpose, and the purpose for you is to get the job. And somebody used to always say you have to be hungry for the job, and the interview board are looking for the best candidate. They're not, I always say this, they're never trying to catch you out. They're trying to get the best person for the job.
Come on.
Yeah,
Do you have any
Eilish, yeah, I have a question. Like most often in interviews, at the end you're asked, like, do you have any questions for us? So what is happening with that question in the interviewer's mind?
Yeah, and I'm asked that too, funny enough, because this, we always say, like, I have a whole role that I say if I'm chairing an interview. I explain my role, this person's role, that person's role, and I always say everything's confidential. We'll be writing during the interview, and don't worry about that. It happens for everyone. And at the end, we leave room for you to ask questions. And people always say, oh, should I ask a question? And I said, if you have a question, ask it. But if you don't ask a question, I certainly wouldn't be marking you. It never came into the marking of any interview board that I was on. It's just, and generally people will say, when will I hear that the job has been filled? Or, I don't know. It's a good question that you're asking, but I think it's not a marked question, it's not marked as part of the criteria.
So it's just a nice invitation.
Yeah, and it kind of rounds off the interview if you have something, and people might say, I brought along my other examples, and would you like to see them? And sometimes we'd look at them, but so that can be a question somebody asks, do you want to see some additional information they have, or something that they feel they left out in the interview? They might say it at the end. When you asked me that question, I wanted to say, that type of thing. And if there is something like that, do say it,
Do you think there could be any particular kind of question that you would not suggest people ask to the board?
Well, I think that any question that relates to the job and to your application and to the company, and that's another thing, I suppose I did skirt over it. Really, as I said, that girl, I was amazed that when I asked, she didn't know a lot about the health service, so public service. And so another thing I would say to people, if there's someone you can shadow in that job, do that. Like I did that with a pharmacist, and that public health nurse, I advised her to go and shadow, ask one of our local public health nurses to get a feel for the job. So what you're really doing is training yourself in what the job means, and you'd have to really care a lot to do that. But she did do that, and she wrote in her resume that or the testimonial, that every day from the day I started to train her, she's pictured herself in the role. But yeah, you must know about the company. Imagine going into an interview with Amazon and they say to you, so what do you know about Amazon? Oh, I never thought. You would be amazed at the number of people who would say that, you know. And also, like, I've had people coming with that, like, amount, 4 lines on a competency, made no effort, you know. You're going to get a big X if you do that. You know, you have to put some effort in. And like I said, it needs to be concise, not waffly, you know, have the words in it that make meaning to the company, you know. So what about that question about the crisis? Did anything come in on that?
Yeah. So Rajiv has mentioned that people having spent some significant years in a certain profession feel unmotivated, lack of growth, etc., and are not sure how to move forward. So that's the kind of crisis.
Yeah, that's a coaching question, you know, isn't it? And you know what, and Cindy, probably many people on the call will have answers to that, but it's around self-esteem, that question, in my opinion, that because and I know people who've invested a lot of time and energy and career in a role that maybe for a long time they knew they didn't like or want, and they stuck with it for personal reasons. Maybe they needed the money, etc., etc. And I did say at the outset that I would have seen that a lot, particularly when I was studying conversational intelligence. A lot of people sharing on LinkedIn, well, mostly Facebook, because that was the at the time, that's what was used, about how that happened to them. And they had to take a big step out into the world of self-employment, you know. So if somebody's having a crisis like that, a very good thing to do maybe is to write down on a sheet of paper, what is it about this career, you know, what is it? In other words, get the facts. I'm a great believer in getting the facts of what it is. So write down the facts of what it is, and then also write down a list of your ambitions for what it is you want for yourself. And it may mean taking a big step, but everyone that I know that did that, they never regretted it, you know. But if you're coaching somebody, as we all know, and the new markers tell us that you're going to explore with people to the nth degree. So as you explore, that person becomes aware of what is going on for them, hopefully with good questioning, you know. But I do think I have seen that a lot, you know, that people want to move. And it is very attractive, isn't it, to move into a career in coaching, you know.
Absolutely.
And
so it sounds like preparation. Sorry, you go, Kamal.
So somebody in the chat box also asked a question around, you know, what is conversational intelligence?
All right. Yeah. Well, I studied it in 2016 with Judith E. Glaser, and sadly Judith passed away in 2018. I brought her to Ireland, and she spent some time here. And conversational intelligence is, I'm a consultant with the Creating We Institute in New York. So Creating We, if you want to know more about conversational intelligence, and you Google Creating We, you can ask questions, because there is actually some training happening in it. Judith is not doing the training clearly, but some of my colleagues are doing training in conversational intelligence. And there is a book, Judith's book is Conversational Intelligence, and it's all about, really what I loved about it is where I learned, and I've said this, Cindy knows this on other calls, I learned when I was coaching the levels of listening, and I was always saying, oh my God, I'm not listening. And when I learned how to listen through Judith's methodology of, you know, instead of being working out of protection and fear in level 1 listening, and level 2 is about being right, you know, I need to be right, and I'm right, and you're wrong, and I'm right, and we are never going to agree. And then the sharing and exploring together is the level 3 of listening. So those levels of listening, but it's a lot more than that, and there's a lot of tools, but they're in the book. And I would like to acknowledge Judith as, and I had thought of that, Cindy, even though I wasn't using conversational intelligence per se today, but it is something that I love dearly, and that is really worth look. If you look up now, whoever that is, go to YouTube and you will see Judith E. Glaser, and there are some fabulous pieces that she gave on conversation intelligence herself.
And Eilish, last year we did a webinar together.
Yes, and we talked about the dashboard and the levels of listening.
Yes, so it's on our YouTube channel. Just
right.
type in or look for Masters in Coaching. It was the beginning of last year.
And so Maria Escobar Borden is the leader now, and Maria is with Creating We Institute. So you can access them through the web, through the Google. But have a look first and listen, because people contacted me after she passed away who did not know Judith at all, but listened to her and really loved her style. And I don't think they knew, you know.
Yeah, she's a remarkable person. Eilish, there's one more question here. How do we stick to coaching and not consulting, since quite a lot of the candidates will have questions, doubts, and we expect the coach to tell?
Yeah, well, I don't tell. What we do together, and it's a bit like the competencies. If you come in the door, that person came in the door to me to prepare for an interview, like I say, I'd be asking, email me your job description, your person spec, and your CV. And then when you come in the door, I will be asking you, why, a series of questions, but I will be exploring with you. But I absolutely 1000% guarantee I won't be telling you unless it's something factual you need to know about. I would maybe say to somebody, you need to find this, this, and this, because that's part of that job. So like I said, you have to have the knowledge or the information that the job is telling you it requires. And that's the responsibility of the candidate. It's not my responsibility, but I definitely do point them in the right direction and have done that. But as regards to, I'm always coaching you, and I'll tell you, it's not a secret, but one of the things I do is affirm, affirm, affirm. And that is one of the things I learned from Judith, that she listened. So the biggest compliment you can give to anyone is to listen to them, to truly listen. So I listen to those candidates and I build their confidence that way. And it helps them when you go to interview them,
We have reached the end of our time. And you were right, Eilish. You were right when you said, we're going to need 3 sessions for this. So
it's very in-depth, like there's an awful lot to it. If you were taking it stage by stage,
Yeah. I invite you to round up. And before that, I want to thank all our participants for attending today. And I'm not sure, Eilish, whether you can share your slides or not. If you can,
no, I wasn't going to do that. They're on the call anyway.
Yeah, right. They are on the call, and while anybody's listening on YouTube, they'll be able to see the questions. So
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, well, if you're like me, what I do, even with the ICF competencies, they have, those little. If I'm putting on makeup or in the shower or getting dressed or something, I click on my speaker and I listen, and it goes in over and over. And with Judith's book, I had it on audio and I used to play it all the time, play it in the car, play it. And it does filter into your mind how it all works,
Absolutely.
And I wish everyone or anyone on the call who's applying for a job and wants to change to do it, just go for it. And I wish them the very best of luck, Cindy.
And thank you. Thank you. Your generosity is, thank you.
Like yourself, Cindy. And thank you for facilitating us, Kamala.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. See you next
Bye,
month.
everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. We'll see you next week with a new theme and new session. Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you, Eilish. Have a good night.
Bye.
Good day.
Good night.